Welcome to this episode of Zealots of Birbio. My name is Tom, and today I'm going to be walking you through how to make an NPC in the True RPG. Let's get right to it. But first, watch this silly little intro. Yeah, YouTube intros, you gotta love them. I made that one myself. Alright, so let's get started. When you're starting to make an NPC for the True RPG, the first thing, obviously, that you need to do is print out an NPC character sheet. They're found on the site, the rules site, and they're pretty easy, they're pretty simple to understand, at least. So, after you print one out, know that you should print one out for each NPC for the most part, but if there's like a stock NPC like soldiers or some acolyte group or that kind of thing, you can just make NPCs just for that one stock NPC and just have one for all of them. Maybe if there's like a leader or a boss or some kind of special person, like some NPC that will be recurring, maybe like, for example, Starn of the Watch, you can make a character sheet just for him. But for the most part, you just need to make it for type characters rather than for each individual character, unless it's a big NPC. So, after making the character sheet, next thing you need to do is make their name. This is so important. It's insane. So, when you make a character's name, the main thing you need to keep in mind is the meaning behind the name and the feel that the name gives, I guess. Like, for example, me saying that I'm Tommy makes it so that you can trust me more, because it's a normal name, it's believable, and you could probably see me as a Tommy. But you should know, my name is not actually Tommy. It's Timothy. So in making someone's name, you need to make it catchy and simple. Don't choose names that are super big, like Gronkus Filiborno or something, anything like that. You won't remember that. Like 2 seconds from now, you probably don't even know what I just said. I don't even know what I just said. Like, getting names that are just really complicated and weird, like as I usually call them, orc names, because in Dungeons and Dragons, all the orc names are just ridiculously clunky. When you choose an orc name, it doesn't help with your character being memorable for the player characters, and so that can really hurt your NPC overall, because the main thing you want with an NPC is for them to be memorable. So there's that, but there's also the idea that their name should have a little bit of a catch to it, like a little bit of something that your players remember, and it's almost like a hint to what the character was like. Like, for example, with my character Dreymouth the Wise, Dreymouth sounds intimidating, it sounds like interesting, and sounds big, and then the Wise, that after name or whatever you call it, that's so important because automatically the characters know, oh yeah, he was that wise man that they found on the hill. Super easy, super simple. Just having a title like that can really help. But there's also some deep meaning behind that too. When you have an NPC, it's really good to have meaning behind the name, such as Dreymouth, actually, same character. Dre actually means to pull. It comes from like Old English dragon or something like that. It's spelled with A-G-A-N. But it means to pull, and then mouth means, it was kind of like a reference to speech, and so he's pulling the plot forward with his words. That was kind of the idea that I had. So like, just putting a little bit of effort into their name when you create them, not only can it create interesting names, but it can also create just an overall, I don't know, depth to your world and depth to your players' understanding. And if your players know a little bit of etymology, that could just be either an interesting joke for them or just actually enlighten them to a little more about the character, maybe their secrets or their motivation. And the next thing is motivation. When you have a character's motivation, you have the character. That is the main part of the character. Not many people understand this. But the motivation is probably the most important part of a character, just because when you have a motivation, or which is like a goal or an ideal of the NPC, then everything they do comes from that. Everything they do derives from that goal, and therefore that could change the status of the players being either enemies or best allies, or they might just be completely indifferent to the players because it's like, oh, you don't affect my goal at all. right? So I think that's a huge part of the character, and just writing that on the top of your NPC character sheet, or just having that in mind, running through your head the whole time as you roleplay the character, that's huge, because I think the biggest mistake you can make as a game master is completely forgetting their motivation and then doing something that they wouldn't really do, that doesn't really add to their end goal. And then you have to think, oh, how would I make this work? But you don't have to do that if it's constantly running through your mind and you have a definite, simple motivation. Like, it can be as simple as, like, a man wanting to cure his wife's disease. Or it can be, like, really complex and large scale, like, someone wanting to, like, overthrow the king so that they can enlighten the world with a communist revolution. Like, who knows? It could be really, really complex, or it could be really simple. But as long as there is a motivation there, that is the core of the character, and gives them depth. It gives them a meaning in the campaign, and also, yeah, it can just be the deciding factor of their reputation with the characters. So after that, we'll go back to how you make them a memorable character. Make a physical description for them. So when you first introduce your character, you will describe your world, you'll describe the area around them, and then you'll describe your character, or the NPC that you're introducing. And the description of the character should both bring forth a certain aura to them, or a certain mood. For example, me being Tommy and wearing blue, it makes it so that I'm more of a relatable character. So when you have a physical description, it can make it so that your character becomes real. But don't have... Use some descriptors, like maybe 3 minimum and then 7 maximum. But don't use too many descriptors, or else your players will just like completely forget, and it's like, oh, I don't know this character. You can save some of your cool descriptions and your cool things for other NPCs. Save your ideas. Try to use the minimum that you need to make a good character. Don't just have like 20 different adjectives for this character and then expect for the players to remember them with all those adjectives. That's a little excessive. But so these descriptions that you have, they also need to be memorable. You can't just have any old description like, oh, they have 2 ears, a nose, and 2 eyes. Like, you can't just do that. That's stupid. No, you have to have them memorable. And they have to be things that are like unique to this character. That's like the main thing right there. There's also a level of detail that you have to have for it to be interesting. Like, you can't say, oh yeah, he has a sword in his sheath and armor on. Like, that's so bland and doesn't really add anything to your world. And once again, that could just be like a basic trait of many different NPCs. So that's not anything you can distinguish them from. Instead, describing it something like they have a brandished pig iron sword, claymore even, that's in like a sheath behind their back, strapped to their back, and the sheath is dark green, strapped with leather, and over plate mail armor that shines a peculiar seafoam color in the afternoon light. Like something simple like that. I just pretty much made that up, but like that's like right there. That is an interesting description. And while the players might only recognize, oh, he has a claymore, he has a green sheath, and plate mail armor. That might be all they get from it. But that adds so much to the world. That extra description, that extra care and detail, can just make it so that they might remember that all. And then they might be like, oh, brandished pig iron sword. Brandished means, like, they might draw more meaning from that. They might think about the character more. They might care about them more because you put more effort in. And the more effort you put in as a game master, the more care the players have, because they notice you care about this world and you actually care to make it interesting and detailed. So that's huge. And then what you can even do is add humor. Like, for example, when I was describing the very serious and solemn and like intimidating character Starn of the Watch in The Standard Tide, I described him as having a good jawline. Like, that's ridiculous. The clash there is ridiculous. And that made them laugh. That made them, like, make some jokes. And that's a good thing. That makes it so that when they go back, they remember this character. And you can even reference that joke saying, oh, he's the guy with the good jawline. And then they'll automatically know, oh, we remember talking about him earlier, right? So that's a huge step. But overall, just make it so that you know what the character looks like, so that you can describe things like, oh, they take out their sword. So it's not just like, what, they have a sword? Wait, what? Once you describe the character and you know exactly all that they have on them, that can make it so that the game runs more smoothly, and overall you can utilize the character in ways that you might not have been able to if you didn't know what they had on them or how they look or that kind of thing. So the next thing you need to do is make a quirk. This is tied into that directly. a quirk, more colloquially, is like something that sets them apart, something that the players will remember about this NPC. Like, even after the campaign's done and, like, you might not even be friends with these people, they might still remember this NPC and be like, oh, that was actually a really cool idea for an NPC. But for a quirk to work, it has to be super simple, like, utterly simple, but also super original. Like, you can't have seen it anywhere else. And that's a huge step in becoming a good game master, is being able to have those really creative, simple, and unique ideas. But it comes with practice. Just make some NPCs. Don't hate any of your ideas. Just be happy with them. They'll get better over time. So when you have a quirk, it should be something that your players can think about and remember. Like either like a character's accent, or maybe a weird habit that they have, like scratching their nose when they talk, or who knows? Just something like even a catchphrase could work really well. For example, actually, in the show Community, Magnitude has the pop pop. That was horrible, but he has that catchphrase, right? And everyone remembers that. It adds energy to the room, and like there's meaning behind it, but at the same time, it's just very simple, very original. And then there's also, like, in the same show, Starburns. He has the star sideburns, and his nickname also adds to that quirk, making it so that you remember it better. But like, that is a simple quirk that kind of just defines the character and makes you remember them. It doesn't have to be the core of their character or anything important to who they are. It just has to be something that the players can remember them by. It could even be, oh, they have 4 fingers. That has nothing to do with anything in their motivation or their personality or anything like that. But that's something that they remember, and then they draw from that memory, oh, 4 fingers? That's this guy, right? So a quirk, very important. It could be something that brings together the character or simplifies the character, or it can just be something that makes them remember the character. And so because of that, the first impression is extremely important, and you can use the quirk in that first impression, and then after that point you can develop depth with the character. But you don't need to develop depth. Throwing a character on the players is never a good idea, and a quirk is a really good way to ease them into the character and make it so that in their second impression they are like, oh, I remember that character, and then they're able to experience them more, and kind of, as you draw out the character's motivation and add some depth to the character, they can actually appreciate it more, rather than being like, what? I don't care about this NPC, right? And also, if you make the quirk funny or interesting, they'll want to know more about the NPC, because it's like, oh, I like this character, just automatically. So, also, that has to do with likes and dislikes. But it's not only the players liking or disliking the NPC, it's also the NPC liking or disliking the player character. So that's a huge thing. So what you can do, it's actually in the NPC stat block right off the bat, is have a set of preferences for the NPC, like either likes or dislikes. It's kind of important to do in terms of reputation, because not every NPC will like every type of person, right? If you are very cool yourself, it's probably pretty probable, yep, that you will not like very invested people. Like, if you're cool, you'll like cool people more, right? And so just writing that down in your character sheet, it could be good. This is interchangeable with adding their stats, which is technically a later step, because it's one of the last things you should do, because you should know your character very well before you do the stats, because that like changes how you roleplay them. But at the same time, knowing their likes and dislikes, maybe you could make it so that you base the stats off of that. So maybe you could do this later, maybe you could do this now. But yeah, step 6 is know their likes and dislikes. And there's an interesting way that I like to do this. I actually have a reputation score system that I just kind of do in my head. So whenever there's anything that the players say that the NPC would like or relate to or anything like that, I give that player 1 point kind of thing. And usually, sometimes I write it down, sometimes I just keep it in my mind if it's a small social encounter. And so I give them 1 point, or if they say something that offends them or just directly goes against their motivation or anything like that, I'll dock them a point. And every 5 points influences reputation. So if it's negative 5 points, that's -1 reputation kind of thing. But then also afterwards, with the preferences, if they like certain traits that the characters have, then they add certain bonuses. Like, usually what I do is, for every +1, for example, if they like cool, for every +1 for cool that the player has, that's 1 more point. And if they dislike a certain thing, it's the same thing. For every +1, it's -1 point. And so afterwards, I have for every 5 points, it increases it or decreases it by 1 reputation, and I just kind of keep that in mind. And afterwards, I calculate that and tell the players, you have this reputation with that character. Sometimes you don't even have to do that kind of calculation. That is kind of tedious, and it's a lot to keep track of for your first times as a game master. Sometimes you can just say, I think by what the reputation scales say, I think you're like a +4 with this character, or that kind of thing. Or just keep in mind, oh, they went directly against their motivation. I'm going to have like just 5 points right for that, right? So it just decreases, or even 10 points. Just like it can be very malleable according to what you want with the character or what you want to do with the campaign, kind of thing. But just something to keep in mind, and something if you're more of a mathematical statistic kind of guy, that's something that can help you with that. So after that, I think the main part of making it so that a character has some complexity and depth to them is their backstory, quite obviously. And so that can be the deciding factor between them being a 3-dimensional character and a 2-dimensional character. If they have like an interesting backstory, it doesn't even have to be deep or complex. It just has to be something. There has to be some depth there, so that if the players want to dig into this character and learn more about them, they can do that, and they won't just hit a dead end, right? So this backstory, it could even just be like a short paragraph that you write on the back of their NPC character sheet, and then have a few names of like people and places that you can just draw from for them to reference when you're role playing them. So that's a very important part, and from that you can assign certain stats based on what they've done in their life, especially like childhood financial status, that kind of thing. That's directly tied to the backstory. And even things like cool, according to how much they've been through, they might have been affected certain ways to be more cool or more invested. So with their stats, just plot them in using the polar system, the same thing you'd do when making a character. That's pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, don't make any stats too extreme, because unless you really want to roleplay that, but that would kind of be a quirk in and of itself. If you made their stats very extreme, like having +3 weird, yeah, that's almost a quirk at that point. So if you want to make that a quirk, don't have more than 1 quirk, or it's risky to have more than 1 quirk because that's a lot to keep track of. Just keep 1 quirk per character, and if you're going to have extreme stats, make that their quirk. So then again, with those stats, there are also skills. You have to choose skills. Of course, as the game master, you can decide how many skills you want for the character. If they're more powerful than the players, you can make it so that they're maxed out at 10, or even more if they have certain powers. If you want to add powers, feel free to do that. You're the game master. What I usually do is just have 5 skills. If they're a warrior or that kind of thing, sometimes I'll do 7, but that's about it. Choose skills according to what they would have, according to their backstory, according to what mistakes they've made, or what they're just good at overall. And that can be just an interesting thing you can use to develop the character and make it so that they're not just a bland piece of paper. So after that point, you need to know what faction, what group, who they're allied with, because that's so important in making allies with them. If the players want to be allies with them, they might not be able to, because the players might be part of a faction, or the players might support a group that these people are directly against, and that can directly change reputation. Like, that can be a deciding factor. It's like, oh, you're in this group, that's automatically minus 10 reputation points, kind of thing. So that's a huge thing, is knowing what group they're part of, so they can either they can ally with the players according to what their faction's goals are, or they can be their enemies automatically, just finding out, oh, you're part of that faction, I'm going to have to kill you, kind of thing. So that can make interesting things in the story, and overall that just plays into motivation. Lastly, or second to lastly probably, I don't even know at this point, but if you want to make monsters, the TRPG system isn't really made for monsters, so yeah, it's a lot of your own discretion, but you can raise stats above their normal maxes. You can make it so they have certain like special weapons and that kind of thing, like claw attacks, that kind of thing, that deal different types of damage. And also, yeah, but mostly it's just going to be very homebrew. Even like the powers you use are going to be homebrew. Like if you have a hulking, like for example, a Gorgon in D&D, having them breathe a certain, I think it's like a poisonous gas or that kind of thing, that'd be a certain power or attack or that kind of thing. And then having it so that they have the armor, you can change base defense a ton. You can change their max injury, though I wouldn't do that more than like 25 for max injury that they can take. Also, willpower, that's going to be pretty huge. You got to keep track of that with monsters, with any NPC really that you're fighting. And then also, really important for making a monster, have a weakness. Have something that cripples, something just like utterly cripples them, makes it so that they can't fight. So that if the players are smart and use some strategy and think out what they're doing, they can just easily beat it. But if they don't, it'll be a difficult fight and risk death. So that could be like something like a giant worm that's attacking them that you just can fry with like fire magic, or like a mole that is like blinded by light, or even like just something like a scarecrow burning up in flames.
Wow, flames.
With that, just having some sort of weakness to add depth to them. But also, just on a completely different note, when making an NPC, the character's accent kind of plays into them a lot. Like, the character voice is a main part of the character, something that the players will most definitely remember. There's no doubt about that. You, as a game master, you have so much to keep track of, you probably will forget what the character's voice is, so just write it down on your paper. But your players will always remember. Like, it happens so much of the time where I'm just talking, then it's like, that's not the character voice that you used last time, and it's like, crap, I was hoping they wouldn't notice. So, that happens a lot. Make sure that you know the character's voice or accent, and be able to do it consistently. Don't choose an accent that's way too difficult for you to do, because that'll just take away from the game and make it so they're drawn out of the game. It might be funny for a bit, but then every time you bring that back, that NPC, it'll be like, he's doing this character voice that he can't do. So make sure that you are comfortable with the character voice, even practice it before the session. But yeah, have a character voice for every character. Even if it's just some subtle difference between, or, oh yes, I see what you're doing. Like, even if it's just a subtle difference to your normal voice, that makes it so that the players, it not only does it notify the players, oh, this is the DM speaking rather than the player speaking, or vice versa, but it can also differentiate the fact that, like, each NPC is different, or should be different, in personality, in everything, really. That can really add to that, and also just having things like, if they're in a faction, them having a slight British accent, can make it so that the players, if they're smart, can notify, oh, this guy might be part of that. Like, for example, the Verban Dynasty, everyone has deep British accents, or at least British accents. That is just a Verban Dynasty thing in the Stain on His Hide. And that, if the players notice, it's like, oh, if they have a British accent, they might be affiliated with the Verban Dynasty. We've got to keep that in mind. So, yeah, overall, just make your NPC memorable. And so if I were to go through the points again, print out your character sheet, then choose a good name, put some effort into your name, and then after that, make their motivation, make it so that they have a goal, make it so that everything they do derives from that, and then make a physical description and a quirk, things that'll draw out the character's differences and make them a little more unique. And then after that point, make their more statistical things like likes and dislikes, and their stats, and also just a brief backstory, so that you know a little bit about the character. And then also do their skills and powers if you want to do powers, and then decide who they're allied with, what factions they're part of. And then after that, just make a good character voice and practice it a little bit. So that's 10.5 steps on how to make an NPC for the TroRPG. This is the first episode of this Gamemaster's Grimoire. I hope you enjoyed. Farewell.